This is not my story. This is a story told by my aunt over 20 years ago. My aunt is many things. She is kind, sweet, beautiful, smart, and reliable. One thing she is not is a liar. These days, she is busy taking care of her grandchildren, but this story takes place a very long time ago, before she was married, and before she had a real career. She had many jobs growing up. The first job she got was a bartender. After graduating from school, she was unemployed for over a year, until she took on the job of being a bartender for a relatively small bar. It was a bar run by the owner, who we will call Max. Max was running the bar on his own, before deciding to hire my aunt. This meant that it was just the two of them running the counter. They would take turns opening up and closing down the bar. Most of the time, however, my aunt was the one who would have to close down the bar at 3 a.m. But this only meant that Max would have to open it up in the morning. The bar was situated underneath an apartment floor, and the building itself was quite old. There were some stories told about the building. There was a rumor about the building that an old lady had died in the building while she was babysitting her grandchild. Apparently, she had a very sudden heart attack. There were some other stories too. Some of them sounded far-fetched, but Max, being the owner of the bar, has not had any supernatural experiences. Because of this, the stories were nothing more than rumors for my aunt. On that particular day, Max and my aunt were running the bar together as it was a busy day for them. If I recall correctly, it was during a holiday. Max had been feeling off the whole night and had to visit the doctor the next day. So after everybody left the bar to head home, Max left my aunt to lock up the bar. My aunt wasn't bothered by this. She had locked up the bar a dozen times, but because of how crowded and busy the bar was, she had to clean up a lot more than usual. After the last stool was placed on top of the bar, she went to grab her things. That's when she heard footsteps coming from upstairs. She thought it was funny how the tenants upstairs never made a sound during the day, only supposedly waking up at night like vampires. She got her things and started locking the door, when she then heard something fall from within the darkened bar. There was no shattering like when glass hits the floor. It was more like the sound of a mop falling onto the ground. Feeling defeated and totally exhausted, she decided to leave whatever fell on the ground to Max to clean up when he opens up the bar. With that being said, she locked up and left to go home. The next day, my aunt didn't have to clock in until 8 p.m, but she received a call from Max. Still exhausted from the night before, she groggily picked up the phone and answered it. On the other end, Max asked her if she locked the doors before she left. My aunt reassured him that she did, only for Max to inform her that the doors were unlocked when he arrived. He then tells her that he heard someone's voice coming from the storage room, the room located behind the bar counter. When he went to check it out, there was no one in there. He then heard something fall from the main room, like wood hitting the floor. When he ran out to see what it could have been, he saw a faint shadow on the wall, and then disappear. My aunt thought that Max was messing with her because she had heard the same thing last night, but as she began to question him, Max reassured her that he wasn't, and that there was just no way. My aunt then asked him if the sound was possibly made by the tenant living upstairs. That's when Max informed her that the apartment upstairs was available for rent, and that there was absolutely no one living upstairs, and he was certain of it. She then recounted the sounds she heard last night, the footsteps that were so audible. Max thought that she was maybe messing with him, because he has never heard such a thing, but my aunt swore on her life that it happened. The conversation ultimately ended up nowhere after some back and forth about who was messing with who. That night, my aunt went to work as usual. When it came time for closing and all the customers had left, My aunt was doing some final touch-ups and cleaning. She started putting cups away when the same footsteps from the night before began. This time, however, she also heard very audible doors opening and closing. Freaked out, my aunt quickly got her things and got the keys. She accidentally left the storage room lights on as she was ready to run for her life. She got outside and began locking the door when she saw in the corner of her eyes some humanoid figure inside the dimly lit bar. She looked up at the figure, just visible with the aid of the storage lights, to see that it was an old lady in a nightgown, with blackened, dark eyes, as if she had no eyeballs, standing in the middle of the bar. The scariest thing was that she had no legs. It was as if she was hovering over the wooden floors. At this point, my aunt was shaking so much she left the doors unlocked and ran to her car. She called Max multiple times, but he didn't pick up. After multiple failed attempts, she drove home. Needless to say, she couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, Max had called her asking what happened because the lights were still on and the doors were unlocked. My aunt began retelling her story to Max, telling him about the footsteps, the sound of doors opening and closing, and of course, the old lady in the nightgown. She told Max that she felt very scared and uncomfortable working there and told him that she was going to quit. Max tried his best to comfort her and try to make her stay, but she was scared to death. A few days later, Max called my aunt seemingly out of nowhere. She picked it up and asked him what was up, reassuring him that she was not going to go back to work in that bar. That's when Max told her that he had been doing some digging and found out that there used to be an old lady that lived above the bar. She was a kind and quiet lady. She was rarely visited, and when she was, it was to babysit her grandchild. One day, she had fallen over and could not get up. She was weakened to such an extreme point, she couldn't move. Sadly, she ended up laying there for days until she passed away with no one to visit her or check up on her. Since working there and hearing about that story, my aunt now believes in ghosts. Back in the late 90s, I was an angsty teenager in high school. I hated life, hated school, hated people, and I was always bored out of my mind. We had this crazy and stupid rite of passage during homecoming. Basically, kids from the school would come together to this large park near the high school during homecoming weekend and play egg wars. Just think of egging someone's house, except the house is you. And it's an all-out war. It was an old tradition, which meant that the older townsfolk knew about it. This meant that usually people would avoid the park at all costs, unless they wanted to join in on some fun or weren't from town. Anyways, my friend and I were there one night, hiding between a rock and a bush with eggs in hand, ready to attack. Suddenly, this large man, mid-30s or 40s, appears behind us, crouching. He looked like he was a veteran with a green cap, a white t-shirt, and camo pants. All he said was, "Hey guys, I got some eggs if you need some." Obviously, my friend and I were fully prepared with dozens of eggs, so we told him that we were just fine, and that we were stocked and loaded. He said okay, and if you need some, come to the washroom, and left us in peace, heading to the washrooms. The public washrooms were a square building with men's on one side and women's on the other side. It was a basic public washroom in any campground or large park. A few minutes passed and we didn't see anyone from our spot, so my friend decided to change our location. Me, not wanting to move around and possibly get spotted and egged, said it's better to wait it out here. But my friend, being the more active of the two of us, wouldn't have it. He wanted action, and he was gonna get some. After some small bickering, we decided to separate. He said he was going to go west to camp around the swings, and told me that I could join him after I stopped being so sleazy. After he left, I got bored quite quickly and remembered that weirdo that went to the washroom. I hadn't seen him since he left to the washroom, and was quite curious about his character, so I snuck up quietly to a tree surrounded by shrubs near the washroom. I was out of sight, but I could see everything that entered and exited. The first thing that I noticed was just how dark it was outside. There were no lights on, which was strange, because the public washrooms always had lights on for both the men and women's entrances. But that night, for some odd reason, the lights were turned off. Not only that, but it was deathly quiet. There were no bugs creaking and no birds chirping. It was just me breathing. It was strange being there, almost surreal. I was just about to leave when the weirdo sticks his head out of the washroom and looks around. After a few minutes, he shoves his head back in the washroom, but only a few minutes after that, he stepped outside and walked around the perimeter. I began sweating. It was a public washroom, and I had the right to be there. There should be nothing I have to be worried about. But something just didn't feel right. I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. He walked back in the washroom, only to peek his head out again. He ended up doing this over and over and over again. I don't know what his deal was, but he was acting extremely suspicious. After the 5th or 6th time of doing this, he walked out of the men's washroom with a needle in his hand and walked to the women's washroom. At this point, I was feeling extremely uncomfortable. I didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't know what I should be doing. I regretted wandering down here just to spy on a weirdo. I decided I had seen enough and left quickly and quietly, as fast as my nimble legs could go. I was so afraid that if I made a sound, he would come barging out of the women's washroom and begin chasing after me. As I ran, I swear I could only hear my heartbeat. I was listening intently to make sure I was making it out alive. I met up with my friend and hesitated on telling him what happened. I doubted that he would believe me. I mean, who in the right mind would follow some weirdo and spy on him? Wouldn't that make me just as weird as he was? Nothing happened that day, and I didn't report anything to the police either. Looking back, I feel lucky that nothing ever came out of it, because thinking back to that scene, I could feel my gut telling me that something was terribly wrong here. And honestly, I don't think I could ever get that feeling out of me. If you like what you see, please give this video a like to help this channel. This is not my story, but rather my aunt's story. I am very close with my cousin, and as a single child, I feel like he is my brother. As a kid, I would always be dropped off at my cousin's house when my parents couldn't find someone to babysit. That was also true with my cousin. With that being said, I felt like my cousin's mom, or my aunt, is my second mom. She worked as a caretaker and absolutely adores her family. I guess what I'm trying to say is that she would not make anything up or joke about something that is serious with me or my cousin. Well, this is her story. Years ago, her older cousin, also someone I have never met before, as we are not directly related, and two friends were having a girls' night. We will call my aunt's older cousin Melissa for simplicity. It was just a normal night as they began drinking, watching movies, and just in general, chatting. They were all in the living room, sitting on the couch with a table in front of them. After hours of spending time together and about to crash for the night, one of her friends leaves the living room and comes back minutes later with a Ouija board. These are boards that can supposedly communicate with the deceased and the afterlife. Anyways, they start playing around with it, not knowing exactly how to use it, and simply just asking random questions such as, will I marry someone handsome and rich? Or, does someone have a crush on me? That was when the friend who brought the Ouija board begins asking more serious questions about demons and ghouls. This goes on for a while until the other friend gets scared and tells her to stop. Fortunately, she does. After the whole Ouija board scare, none of them could sleep, even though they were pretty tipsy. So instead, they decide to watch some kind of rom-com movie and forget about the whole thing. Then, apparently, one of her friends dropped a plate on the floor. When she bent down to pick it up, she turned pale and faced Melissa. The rest of them looked at the friend and asked her what happened. She trembled and replied, There are legs under the table. All of them bent down and looked underneath it, and all swore they could see a pair of legs there. I know what you're thinking. They're all drunk or tipsy. They were probably just imagining the legs. But it doesn't just end there. They all looked at each other, not exactly knowing what to do. They began talking about it and eventually decided that it was just their imagination. There was no way there could be a person or thing underneath the table during the whole time they were there. It was probably just jeans left underneath the table and thought to be legs. After a while, Melissa gets up from the couch and excuses herself to the washroom. She leaves for about 15 minutes when, all of a sudden, the girls in the living room hear the deep man's muffled voice in the direction of the bathroom, followed by Melissa's horrifying scream. All the girls run towards the bathroom, thinking that maybe there was an intruder that managed to get into the well-secured house. When they all got there, they see Melissa lying on the bathroom ground, crying her eyes out. This story happened a very long time ago, but since that night, my aunt claims that her older cousin, Melissa, has mentally and spiritually left this world. What she means is that Melissa has never been the same since. Her happy-go-lucky attitude has been replaced by a hollow core. She would zone out occasionally and speak to herself. She would find mundane and ordinary things extraordinary. At first, I was hesitant to believe her story, thinking that she could trick me since I was so young when she told me. But I have spoken to my cousin about that story, and he admits that it's true. One time, one of the friends had visited my aunt while my cousin was there. The friend and my cousin ended up talking for a bit while my aunt stepped outside. During the conversation, the topic of supernatural and surreal things was brought into it, and my cousin, being a smartass, casually mentioned the story. My aunt's friend, without hesitation, backed it up. Another time, my cousin had to go to a family celebration, and he had the opportunity to meet Melissa. One of his cousins from the other side of the family was getting married, and they were getting together to celebrate and catch up with each other. According to my cousin, Melissa sat in the corner of the kitchen, not looking at anyone. She held something in her hands as if it was the most amazing thing in the whole world, but my cousin couldn't find out what it was. She was very thin and looked like she wasn't really there. Even when other family members went up to her and spoke to her, she seemed like she was mentally out of the world. Since then, he has never seen her, and her personal life has become somewhat obscured. My aunt wouldn't say anything more about the story, and would just say there's nothing left to say, because she said it all. I wish I could gather more evidence myself, but this is all I have to go on. This happened a few years back. My mom and I had moved into Detroit after a brutal divorce between my parents. It was the second night sleeping at the new house, and neither of us had any energy to do anything after the move. At that time, I didn't want to speak with her because of the now, quote, broken family. I was young and stupid at the time, what can I say? Anyways, on that night, my mom woke me up at around 3 in the morning. We slept in the same room as most of the things were still packed in boxes. She leaned over to me and asked if I was still awake. I opened my eyes and asked her what she wanted. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, making it all more suspenseful. She then asks me if I heard sounds coming from downstairs, something like footsteps. I told her no, and just as I shut my mouth, we hear drawers being opened and closed in the living room downstairs. Our house was being broken into and in the process of being robbed. We both scrambled out of our beds, sitting up, but not knowing entirely what to do. I looked at my mom, and she looked back at me. We didn't know what to do. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. We were both frightened and scared for our lives. It was just me and my mom against who knows how many. As we sat there, I listened to the rumblings downstairs. I assumed my mom did the exact same thing because we were both practically motionless. Drawers opened and closed. Doors opened and closed. Boxes were being peeled open. Based off of my judgment and the sound of the footsteps, it sounded like there was only one person downstairs. Maybe we could take them, I thought to myself. But in all honesty, that was probably the worst idea ever. Who knows if they had a weapon, and who knows what they were capable of. I slowly crept over to the closet in the door. where I knew I had kept my BB rifle. I grabbed it as quietly as I could while my mom went to grab the landline, presumably to call the cops. My hands were trembling. I was so scared that the robber would find nothing appealing downstairs and would make his way up to the stairs to find my mom and I in the room. All I could do was look to my mom for comfort, but I knew she was as powerless as I was. I held the gun up and aimed it at the door, ready to fire at anything that comes through it. As I focused on the door, I heard my mom whispering on the phone. She was now talking to one of the operators. At that point, I wish I could have relaxed, but I knew that there was still imminent danger. I listened intently to the footsteps, just now realizing that it was incredibly quiet. I was surprised my mom heard them. I stood there for what felt like eternity. My mom had stopped talking at this point, and the house was dead quiet. I looked over to my mom with a "what's the situation like" face, and she told me that the cops are on their way and that we should barricade ourselves in the room. Again, since we had just moved in, we didn't really have much in the room. And there was really nothing there to block the door except a bed and a wardrobe. But those things were incredibly difficult to carry and obviously too loud. We stood there motionless for minutes as we didn't know what to do. Minutes felt like hours when suddenly the robber begins creeping up the stairs. What I didn't want to happen was now happening. As the stairs creaked quietly and slowly, we saw headlights beam through our room. My mom looked out and told me that the cops were here. I felt relieved but also immensely anxious. Who would get to us first, the robber or the police? The footsteps coming up the stairs stopped. In fact, there was no sound coming from outside our bedroom door whatsoever. The cops knocked on the front door downstairs, and we heard a loud bang, and the back door opened quickly and shut. I presumed it was the robber jumping down from the stairs and dashing out of the house, after knowing that someone was at the front door. The robber probably thought that it was the residents of the house coming back from work, since we don't own a car and we were dead silent upstairs. The police sirens were also off, presumably so that the cops can catch the robber in the act, which meant that there was no way the robber knew the cops were in the driveway. We slowly opened our bedroom door, confident that the robber had left, and we went downstairs to tell the officers what we think happened. One of the cops stayed with us, while another one searched our entire house. The cop that was taking our statement tried his best to calm us down and make us feel safe again in our home. But my mom and I were visibly shaken. After about 20 minutes or so, the other cop comes back to us and tells us that there was no one in our house. It was finally safe again. Unfortunately, since we never got to see how the robber looked like, we couldn't give them a good description for a perpetrator. The creepiest thing was that the next day, I found footprints in our backyard looking into the house. I was pretty sure it was the robber's footprints. The robber was probably there for the longest time, just staring into our house, to leave behind footprints like that. It still creeps me out to this very day. This happened to me a few years ago during the summer. At this time, I was only about 8 years old, and my cousin was 7, just a year younger. Because of this, we were quite close. My cousin came to visit me that summer, as originally she lived in a large city. I, on the other hand, lived in a small town. That fact didn't hinder our relationship. We still lived relatively close and nearby each other. Anyways, I had a neighbor who was around 60 years old. He was single, living alone in his huge mansion. Since my town was small, word got around that apparently he had died of a heart attack in the middle of the night. It was only gossip since he liked to keep his privacy and liked to be alone. Also, because as a 60-year-old, he was shockingly very healthy for his age. Little was known about him, but what I knew about the man was that he was single, had no family, no brothers, no sisters, no cousins or uncles and aunts. He was an orphan and was very kind, sweet and caring. I thought that it was sad that he had no kids, so he never felt the love of a child and could not have passed on his family tree or lineage. About a month after he passed away, me and my cousin were playing outside. My parents were not home, so we decided to go into his house and explore his mansion. We thought this would be fun, but this was a mistake. When we entered the house, I felt a weird sensation come over me. This sensation was not created because of the fact that the house was absolutely enormous. No, it felt almost like there were eyes on me the moment I stepped a foot in the house. Disregarding that fact, my cousin and I played around and took some of the stuff because we thought they were cool, not knowing that it would be disrespectful. Soon it got dark outside, and I really wanted to leave and go back home. My cousin, on the other hand, wanted so desperately to check out more rooms. The disturbing feeling I got while entering the house never left me. So I got fed up and decided that I had to leave right now. So I left. Unsurprisingly, when I left, a calm wave of relief hit me, as if some weight had left my shoulders. To be clear, I wasn't going to actually leave, of course. I just got outside and hid so that I could scare her when she comes out. I waited a few minutes, but nothing happened. I stood there behind some bushes, waiting and waiting, seemingly forever. About an hour later, I hear my cousin scream. She then bolts right out of the house, out of the front door. I almost missed her. She threw everything she was carrying onto the front yard and did not look back. Back in my house, she became very quiet. When I asked her what happened and why she ran for her life, she wouldn't say anything. In fact, she didn't want to tell me what happened. I was concerned for her. But if she insisted on not wanting to tell me anything, there was nothing I could do. That night, the disturbing sensation I got when I was in the house came back to me. I felt strange and tingly everywhere. It felt as if there were pairs of eyes on me staring at me again in my room, and it seemed to radiate off of the things that I took from my neighbor's house. But there was an off chance that maybe I was just feeling weird, because a bunch of random new things were in my room, and maybe I just felt a little claustrophobic in my room with all of it. Anyways, the next day, she left to go back home, and I didn't hear from her the entire day. I thought maybe she was still shaken from going into my neighbor's house, so I didn't think too much of it. Well, the day after, my cousin calls me and said, "Hey, Alexandria, can I tell you something?" The reason why I don't want to tell you what happened is because when I was looking in one of the rooms, I saw the man hanging and smiling. He began running after me, and I kept seeing him in the night at the corner of your bed, staring at him. I felt weird that moment and threw away all the things I took from him. And now I just try not to get too close to his house.